Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perdichizzi, and thank you for joining me. As always, Week 9 of the college football season concluded. Week 8 of the NFL season in the books. Here at Saturday to Sunday, we will break down everything from another exciting weekend of football that has concluded. Next time we are watching football, the calendar will now have shifted into November. We are on the home stretch of the college football season, and we are fastly approaching the midway point of the NFL season. Let's start where we always start off with the 2026 NFL Draft Report for Week 9. Not a lot to really break down in terms of the offensive skill players this week. So going to be a little bit of a condensed, shorter NFL Draft Report. Talk about a couple guys that stood out and a couple, important, topics in terms of the top prospects for the 2026 NFL Draft. Let's start where we always start off, and that is the quarterback position. I think the guy who probably impressed the most this week, Alabama's Ty Simpson, continues to put himself in position to potentially be a top 10 pick in the 2026 NFL Draft. I think right there with Fernando Mendoza, I think Dante Moore, we'll see if he comes out. But I think Ty Simpson has now put himself in consideration to potentially go top 10. I think he's in position to be the QB2 in this class. This past week, 24-43, 253 yards and 2 touchdowns. I've heard people say a more athletic Mac Jones. I think his game is a little bit better than a guy like Mac Jones. I think the raw traits are a little bit better than Mac Jones. I do think he's got more athleticism. I think the arm talent is a little bit better than Mac Jones. And I don't think the supporting cast, even though he has 2 really good wide receivers at Alabama right now, I do not think the supporting cast that Ty Simpson is playing with is nearly at the level that we saw Mac Jones play with and Tua play with when they were at Alabama. So I think Ty Simpson is standing out more with less around him. Not that he doesn't have a really good team around him, but he just doesn't have, once upon a time, those Alabama teams were far and away the best in the country. Ty Simpson is not doing it with the clear best team around him in the country. So I think right now, I would say he's got a strong chance to be top 10, has a strong chance to be QB2 in this class, and the crescendo has been building for the last few weeks, and I kind of expect it to continue for the rest of the college football season. We'll see if Alabama can put themselves in position to play really some relevant games down the home stretch of this year. Fernando Mendoza this past week didn't have to do too much for Indiana to get a comfortable win, 15 of 22, 168 yards and 3 touchdowns. I think now at this point, Mendoza has put himself in position to be in the poll lead. He's the leader in the clubhouse. He's the guy that right now everybody else is trying to catch if we're talking about who's QB1 of the 2026 class. So right now, week in and week out, when we check in on Fernando Mendoza, it's almost going to be more of a red flag if he has a really poor week and raises concerns that way. Like Dante Moore this past week wasn't, struggled this week mightily, didn't put up gaudy stats. So that's something that raises, right? He had been building and he had been looking like a potential, and I still think he very much could be. The traits, the raw traits, the physical traits are there. But I think at this point now, when we check in on these guys who are towards the top of the rankings, if they have a really poor week, that's going to stand out right now more because we want to see that consistency. And we know there's going to be bumps in the road. So I don't think one poor week, like Dante Moore not playing well this week, I don't think changes the narrative on what I thought about him and what other people thought about him a week or two ago. But it's just something to kind of check in and talk about. Lenora Sellers in that game against Alabama, 222 yards and a touchdown, 67 yards rushing and a touchdown. Sellers is going to be the most interesting one because I think we've already talked enough about Arch Manning, who had a really good week this week, 346 yards and 3 touchdowns. I'm fairly confident Arch is going back to school, but Lenora Sellers could be one of those guys that he looks at the landscape of this year's quarterback class. And if he sees a path where a lot of teams picking in the top 10 need quarterbacks, like we've seen guys like Anthony Richardson get drafted in the top 10 based on physical traits. You can make the case Lenora Sellers is his physical traits stand out even superior to Anthony Richardson, who a lot of teams did like. So I still think Sellers ends up going back to school, but But if he doesn't think there's a path for him to look significantly better, and he's getting word through the grapevine that he could be a top 10 or top 20 pick based on those raw physical traits, I do see a path where maybe he does come out, right? We know he's got the dual right capabilities. We know he's got a big arm. So he's got the arm to push the ball vertically down the field. I think accuracy and ball placement are still question marks. Going through the processing and reading defenses and reading coverages, pre and post snap reads, all that is still a work in progress. But he's got the size, he's got the frame, he's got the athleticism, he's got the physical traits. Teams bet on those traits. So if there's a path for him to still be a first round pick, he might say, you know what, I go back to school and I have a bad year next year, I might fall out of round 1 if I don't end up in the right situation. Do I think about the portal and transferring? So there's paths where I still think his physical traits are so elite in terms of the arm talent, in terms of velocity, strength, and the athleticism, and he does have the prototypical size and frame, that he might just see this as an opportunity in a relatively down quarterback class, and teams really hungry for quarterbacks, he might see this as an opportunity to still go out. So I think Sellers, while I still lean more going back than coming out, it's not like Arch, who I have like 99% chance he's back and 1% chance he comes out. I think Sellers is more like 60-40 right now. I think 60% chance he goes back to school, 40% chance he declares. And if he declares, I still think he can push his way into the round 1 mix. And then the only other quarterback I want to talk about is John Mateer out of Oklahoma. Oklahoma versus Ole Miss was the big game on the docket this past weekend. John Mateer, 223 yards and 1 touchdown. I still think he's got a lot of interesting traits. I do think that he probably is looked at as more of like a day 2 caliber prospect than a day 1 guy right now. We'll see if that narrative can kind of change down the final 2 months of the college football season. Let's take this to the running backs, and 2 familiar names on this list. There's no Jeremiah Love this week, but Jonah Coleman out of Washington, Justice Haynes out of Michigan. Coleman had 75 yards rushing and a touchdown, another 30 yards receiving and a touchdown. Haynes had 152 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns for Michigan on the ground. I will continue to harp on this. These are solid backs, Coleman and Haynes. I don't think they're top 2 round picks. I'm not even sure they're round 3 picks. I think there's a strong likelihood that they go round 3. But I think if we're putting a round grade on them, they would be more like late round 3 to round 4. That might get pushed up into round 3 because of teams maybe wanting a running back, selling themselves on these are 2 of the better guys in the class after Jeremiah Love. But if we're stacking them up, none of these 2 prospects, for me, will be anywhere where I had guys like Cam Scatterbo, not even Bashal Tuden. And those guys were on that round 3, round 4 border. I don't think these guys are at the level of the Scatterbo and the Tudens, who I liked last year, in that range as a late round 3 guy. So I think we're talking about a class where I think it's a real possibility. We have 1 running back in the top 100 being Jeremiah Love. And then we see a run of running backs in round 4, round 5. And that's where we'll start to see guys like Jonah Coleman, Justice Haynes, and others go in that range. Now, could it be a scenario where 1 or 2 push into the top 100? Yeah, I think it's probably likely that we get another 1 or 2 somewhere in the mid to late round 3. I just think if you compare them and stack them with other running backs from past years, their talent level is not at what we saw historically from 3rd round running backs. So that, I think, is where the differentiator is for me. If we take this to the pass catchers, 1 tight end I want to talk about is Tanner Koziel out of Houston. He had 100 yards receiving this past week. I talked about him on the summer shows, a very interesting pass catching tight end who's had tremendous production in college. So Tanner Koziel is one of those guys that there could be a path. Listen, we've seen guys. Look at what Arondé Gadsden's doing. And he's a former wide receiver. I'm not saying that's going to be Tanner Koziel. But if we see a guy put up really gaudy production in college, even if he doesn't fit the profile of what you would expect to see in terms of a complete tight end or even more of a pass-catching tight end, that production sometimes translates. NFL teams have found more ways to be creative and create mismatches. So if there's a good pass-catching tight end that a team thinks that they can create mismatches with, teams will invest in that. So Tanner Koziel is an interesting guy that could come off the board in that round 4 to round 5 range. and be a guy that could eventually get a chance to be a integral part of the pass catching tight end room. Maybe he's a second tight end exclusively when they play, 12 personnel with two tight ends on the football field. But Tanner Colesdale, one of those guys who I think is going to be a guy that generates a little bit buzz in the pre-draft process, because people looking for market share and high production in college, he's going to kind of stick out as an intriguing pass catching weapon at the tight end position. Some wide receivers, guys that we've talked about, guys who I think are locked into the top 10 at the wide receiver position. Jeremy Bernard, I mentioned him before, for Alabama, 5 catches, 54 yards, continues to put himself in position to, I feel comfortable saying, a top 50 pick. We'll see if he could translate that to, potentially be round 1. I think it's in the conversation that he could go round 1 for sure. Denzel Boston continues to look like that prototypical outside physical, tough X wide receiver that can get down the field, create late separation with his body, with his physicality, his play strength. This past week, 10 catches, 153 yards, and 1 touchdown. I mentioned him last week. Chris Brazell out of Tennessee. After talking about him last week, he follows it up with 4 catches, 138 yards, and 1 touchdown. So I think Bernard, Boston, Brazell have all put themselves in position to be top, I'll say, 8 to 10 wide receivers in this draft class. I think all of them have put themselves in position to be top 60 picks or so, top 2 rounds. I think Boston's got a real shot, and Bernard have a real shot at the back end of round 1, if not the early to mid portion of round 2. And I think Brazell's put himself on the map to be a round 2 or round 3 selection as well. So that's really all I have in terms of the NFL draft stock report. I thought it was a little bit of a quiet week in terms of the offensive skill players, in terms of guys who are really worthy of being discussed at the high level in terms of their NFL draft stock for the 2026 NFL draft. Let's turn this over to the NFL side of things, go from the Saturday game to the Sunday game. Let's start by checking in with the rookies. And the rookies continue to produce in a variety of different ways, and they're fun to kind of talk about. Let's talk about one first, Jackson Dart. He was matched up with the Eagles. This was his second time against Philadelphia. Philadelphia really dominated that game start to finish. But if you watch that game closely and don't just look at the final score and don't look at just sack numbers, and you watch Jackson Dart, he lost Cam Scatterwood, who I'll talk about momentarily, due to an injury. He's playing with probably the worst wide receiver room currently in the NFL, on the road in Philadelphia, hostile environment. And you watch some of the plays Jackson Dart makes, whether it's a big third down, whether it's handling pressure, his ability to handle pressure, his ability to maneuver in the pocket. He had a 60 or 70-yard touchdown taken off the board on a bad offensive pass interference call. He had 2 other passes that were deep down the field. One to Theo Johnson that was his best throw of the day. Right, it should have been a catch, dropped. Another one, Darius Slayton. So he had 193 yards, but it could have easily been a 300-yard game just with those 2 plays that I'm referencing. He would have been closing in on 300 yards and multiple touchdowns in Philadelphia in a game where, and he ran for another touchdown this past week as well, which we know he's going to do that on the ground. But I'm coming away week in and week out very impressed with Jackson Dart. What you want to see, we see a lot. Even when the Giants lose, you're seeing Jackson Dart make big-time plays that you expect to see from a franchise quarterback. And I'll continue to say it. I don't know if he's going to be 25% the player that Patrick Mahomes is. But if you watch early career Patrick Mahomes, his ability to maneuver the pocket, his ability to make plays happen off structure, his ability to keep his eyes down the field, throw from multiple platforms. There are times that when you watch Jackson Dart play, even with the lack of support around him, you see some glimpses of Patrick Mahomes in terms of the play style, the escapability in the pocket, the ability to make things happen, playing off structure. Obviously, he's got leaps and bounds to even go in terms of the rest of his skill set to even be in the stratosphere of Patrick Mahomes. And like I said, any Giants fan, if you tell anybody he's going to be 50% of Patrick Mahomes, people would sign up for that right now. So I don't want anybody to take from this that I'm saying he's going to be the next Patrick Mahomes, because I'm not. But if you watch stylistically how he's maneuvering in the pocket, you see a lot of early career Mahomes. And I think that speaks volumes on how good of a start to his career we've seen from Jackson Dart. I mentioned it I think it was last week, if not the week before, waiting to see when New Orleans was going to give Tyler Shuck an opportunity to find out what he was, because the Saints are going to be picking near the top of the draft. Are they interested in a Ty Simpson or Fernando Mendoza, Dante Moore, or Lenora Sellers? Well, they just invested an early second-round pick in Tyler Shuck. They need to find out what he is and what he isn't, especially since was an older rookie. They need to see, can he be the guy? And I think he needs to play the rest of the year. He needs to be put in a situation that they have 8-9 games to truly evaluate him, to see what he is before they're staring at a possibility of taking a quarterback early in the 2026 NFL draft. This past week, 17 of 30 once he came into the game, 128 yards. I think they're going to hand the reins to him to see what he is. I think it's the right call. I don't think he's a long-term starter. I think he's more of a high-end quality backup type player. But, he's got some interesting skill players there. Chris Olave's having a great year. Rashid Shaheed, if they keep him, he's a big-time playmaker as well. Alvin Kamara's best attribute right now, still catching the ball out of the backfield. Juwan Johnson's had a nice year. So it's not like he's devoid of offensive skill players. So he's got offensive skill players. He's got a good offensive-minded head coach. It'll be interesting to kind of see how he looks down the home stretch of this season. If you take to the running backs, I mentioned it before, Cam Scatterbo dislocates his ankle, brutal injury. They didn't even show the replay on Fox. Season over. You hope that he can come back from this and be the player that we saw. His skill set immediately translated. So many people had concerns about whether or not Cam Scatterbo's skill set could translate at the NFL level. And not only did it translate, it was thriving. And it wasn't just the physicality, the contact balance. We knew he was going to bring that, but he was breaking tackles and showing that contact balance and that play strength. And that already was effective. But we were also seeing the quick feet, the jump cut ability. For a guy who's not going to test well in terms of straight line speed, his agility, his lateral quickness, his jump cut ability, his feet were really showing that was not going to be a hindrance at the next level. If anything, it translated and was going to be an attribute on top of the play strength and the physicality, which why it was just last week, I was saying, you can make the case after Ashton Genty and Omarion Hampton and Quinshon Judkins, would Cam Scatterbo be the next rookie running back you would want in terms of dynasty and fantasy leagues? Would he be the guy that NFL teams, if they could redo the draft right now, would he be the fourth running back taken? That was a legitimate conversation 7 days ago. Now, obviously, the injury changes the narrative a little bit. You hope that he comes back from this. There's no lingering effects to impact the type of player that he is and his best traits and how he plays the game. You want to make sure and want to hope that he comes back from this injury. And it was obviously a gruesome looking injury, but hopefully the surgery is already done, right? Attacking rehab, I'm sure as soon as he can. Hopefully he gets back and we see that guy next year that we saw in the early portion of this season. Woody Marks this past week, another 15 touches, 11 rushes, 4 receptions, over almost 110 yards combined. Continues to be a weapon in both the run game and the pass game. I kind of wish Houston would even give him more, but I think Woody Marks, 15 touches, I think that's kind of pushing the envelope. So I know people want the 18 to 20. I'm not sure Woody Marks is a 20-touch guy. I think Woody Marks is a 15-type touch guy where you get him 10 to 12 rushes and then 3 to 5 catches. I think that's where you want him. So even if you're thinking long-term, I'm sure they're going to add another running back to pair with Woody Marks and look at Woody Marks as that guy who should be a guy who gets max 15 touches, maybe even ideally 12 to 13 touches a week, and then have another running back get another 15 or so touches as well. I think that's probably the trajectory for Woody Marks, but I think even in that role, he could be a productive player because he does impact the game as a receiver. He can impact the game as a rusher as well. So for fantasy, definitely a little bit of a cheat code, get that PPR value, but also we know receptions are worth more than rushes. I think that's always going to be an integral part of Woody Marks' game. Trayvon Henderson, 10 rushes for 75 yards. That's about as good as the stat line as we've seen from him. So still waiting to see him take on a bigger role. A lot of it's been a lack of production. And now with New England winning, they're not going to force feed him touches if right now they think he's struggling in different areas, whether it's blitz pickup, protection, running routes, seeing the running lanes, and if he's struggling with vision and anticipation and blitz protection and pass pro, he's not going to get on the football field. Like New England is in the thick of the playoff race. And, right now, Drake May is playing at an MVP level. They're going to put the running back out there they trust the most. And right now, that's clearly not Trayvon Henderson. RJ Harvey only had 8 touches this week, but found the end zone 3 times. The first one was like a 40-yard touchdown run, showing that big playability. Later, he punched another one in from the 1-yard line, and then he also had a reception as well. I think we're going to continue to see RJ Harvey's role grow this year. I think by the end of the year, we're going to start to see him at least in that 10 to 12 touch range a game, and I think those could be impactful touches. And I think moving forward, he's another guy who I think you kind of want to keep him in like that 15 to 16 touch range. And I think by his second year, he'll probably be there. But I even think by the end of this year, Sean Payton's a smart enough coach, knows what type of big playability RJ Harvey can bring to the table. I think we'll see RJ Harvey eventually kind of round out into that like 10 to 12 touch range a game, even for his rookie year, and could be an impactful player in that regards. If we take this to the pass catchers, let's just start with the tight ends, because the tight end class is just phenomenal. Oronde Gadsden, I talked about him last week. He follows it up this week with 5 catches for 77 yards and a touchdown. Is now in consideration to be a top 12 dynasty tight end. I mean, things change fast. And a guy like this, producing like this, we know he's got a receiver background. He could be the next Darren Waller type player. I think that's in the realm of possibilities. And right now you got to evaluate it. It's hurt Quinton Johnston a lot over the last couple of weeks. We'll see if that was him battling an injury. But now Gadsden's very much in the mix there as one of the guys that Justin Herbert relies on. I think he creates mismatches, and that's not going anywhere. So Oronde Gadsden is the guy. If anybody is still not buying him in terms of being an impactful player, then you should be making an aggressive move to try to get him in your dynasty leagues. Harold Fannin, 6 catches, 62 yards and a touchdown. I would still be trying to buy Harold Fannin before the NFL trade deadline. I think David Njoku is going to get traded, and that's somebody that you want to attack and get Harold Fannin on your roster now, because I think he'll be quickly in consideration to be a top 8, top 10 dynasty tight end. I think right now he's already in that at the back end of the top 12. And I think he moves up immediately the minute Njoku's gone and he starts producing even better numbers, and then wait till they get an actual better quarterback upgrade. I think Harold Fannin could be a very impactful producer week in and week out. Mason Taylor, anyone who listens to the show for a long time knows I was a big fan of Mason Taylor in the pre-draft process. He's looked good in this past week, 5 catches, 34 yards and a touchdown. And Gunnar Helm, I mentioned him. Get him on your roster now. Chiga Okonkwo could be traded, but even if he's not, I think Gunnar Helm is going to be their starting tight end next year. Listen, before he bombed the combine last year, most people thought he was going to go late second round to somewhere in the middle of the third round. Now, he still ended up going early for it, so he didn't fall that much with the poor athletic testing. But I think his play speed and what he brings to the table is a lot better than what that time speed was, and his lack of athleticism at the combine. I think Gunnar Helm's got a real possibility to be the long-term starting tight end there for the Titans, and we know he's a good pass catcher. So I continue to say stock up on Gunnar Helm. At the wide receiver position, the Houston wide receivers finally got an opportunity. Jalen Noel, 5 catches, 63 yards. Jaden Higgins, 4 catches, 34 yards and a touchdown. I would go buy both of them. Now, I know Nico Collins is locked in, so these two guys are always going to fall behind Nico Collins. But I think next year, their 3 wide receiver set is going to be Nico and Higgins on the outside, Jalen Noel in the slot. I would be buying Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins right now, especially if the owner of them from last year's rookie draft, who probably took them, I would say Higgins probably was the early to middle of round 2. Jalen Noel probably the early portion of round 3. Both of those guys have struggled to start the year, that I think you could be potentially get them at a trade cost at a little bit less than maybe what they were drafted at last year. Chimere Dike continues to get an opportunity for the Titans, 7 catches, 93 yards. There is no reason why Tennessee does not go all in on their young wide receivers. If they could trade Calvin Ridley, I think it would make sense to, and just give as many opportunities this year to Dike, to Alec Iomanor, and kind of see what these two are. They drafted both of them in round 4. Io Manor was a guy that some people thought could have went round 3. DK was always a guy who most people thought was going to go round 4, but they drafted him early round 4. Io Manor was late round 4. Give both of these guys every opportunity to see what they are. Could any of them be a starting wide receiver next year? They obviously need to build up that wide receiver core for Cam Ward. They need to know what they have in DK and Io Manor. And I think this year, the rest of this year, could be an evaluation on both those guys to see maybe how high the pecking order they think they could be. Tej Johnson, with all the injuries in Tampa Bay, has gotten an opportunity and continues to make some plays. I just think he's an interesting guy because Evans is getting older. Godwin, who knows with this injury? They have Buka there. I know they have Jalen McMillan, but Tej Johnson could play. Like he fell to where he did in the draft because the size concerns were such an outlier. But all he does is get open and find ways to get open. So I think Tej Johnson is an interesting guy that I still think you can probably get very cheap. And he'd be an interesting one to kind of stash and kind of see how things shake out in that Buccaneers wide receiver room over the next year or so. Let's conclude the show with a fantasy dynasty report for this past week and a lot of more big picture things that I want to talk about. First one, let's start the tight end position. Tucker Kraft. I think he needs to be evaluated right now as tight end 4 in dynasty land. I think the only 3 tight ends that I would want more than Tucker Kraft at the moment, in no particular order, are Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, and Tyler Warren. I think right now I'd pick Tucker Kraft over Sam Laporta. I think that's close, but I think Kraft has a much better chance of being a more integral part of the Packers offense in terms of touches than Laporta will be in Detroit. It's not that I don't think Laporta's great. He would be 5th for me. But right now, Kraft should be ahead of, I think, of Laporta, ahead of Colston Loveland, even though he has tremendous upside, ahead of Harold Fannin, ahead of Aronde Gadsden, et cetera, et cetera. Tucker Kraft looks like he's ascending to a George Kittle type player in terms of a complete tight end, a guy who's a really good blocker, but also a really good pass catcher, can create mismatches. He's going to be on the football field for almost all the snaps. I think stock up really high on Tucker Kraft. I have him as high as tight end 4 in terms of where I think you could put him in terms of overall dynasty tight end rankings. Another scenario like that, Rashee Rice. Stock up on Rashee Rice, and I think you got to have him in the top 8 to 10 wide receivers for dynasty right now. I think you want to say Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Puka Nacua, Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm still going to have Malik Neighbors over him, just because I think he's got the upside to be the number 1 wide receiver overall. And then I would say you have Jackson Smith-Njigba. And then I think you kind of start to consider Rashee Rice after that group. So I think in that, is there some other guys? Of course there are, like Nico Collins. But I think I'd rather have Rashee Rice than Nico Collins. It's close. So I think it's one of those things where, like, right now, he should be evaluated as a top 8 to top 10 overall dynasty wide receiver. That is where I would put him right now. A couple under the radar guys that I'd be buying right now. I mentioned his name once, Malik Washington. I'll say it again. I think Malik Washington's got a real opportunity to be a top 3 wide receiver moving forward for the Dolphins. If they ever do decide to trade Jalen Waddle, that even elevates him more. Do I think they'll go out and get a guy to go alongside Jalen Waddle? I do, but I do think Malik Washington could be a nice 3rd wide receiver and have some dynasty appeal and would not cost you much in a trade. Troy Franklin is really emerging for Denver. I think right now, because they still have Tim Patrick and they kind of spread it out and Cortland Sutton is there for the long, I think Franklin could still be had at a reasonable cost, but I think stock is pointing squarely up on Franklin. He obviously he worked with Bo Nix in college. They have a good rapport. I think I'd be aggressive in trying to get Troy Franklin on my team because I think the arrow's still pointing up on him and we're going to even see the best of him moving forward. A couple other guys. James Cook needs to be in the top 8 to 10 wide dynasty running backs. If he's not, you should be aggressively buying him as well. Like, people keep wanting to doubt James Cook, and all he does is continue to look like a superstar. He gets plenty of looks near the goal line, scores plenty of touchdowns, even with Josh Allen, stealing a lot of real short yardage touchdowns as well. So if James Cook is not being evaluated, if he's like in that like 11 to 13 or 11 to 14, I think that's too low. He's got to be like that 8 to 9 range. And if not, he's still young enough. He's attached to that offense. I think James Cook should be higher in RB rankings. Breece Hall, I think stock up on him. And if he gets traded, or even if you have to wait to the offseason as a free agent, I think the opportunity is he's going to go somewhere and be the clear focal point of a team's backfield. With the Jets this year, Braylon Allen was a thing. They make Isaiah Davis a thing. The team itself, it struggles. He can go somewhere, and he could go, and next year, if he put up 1,400 yards rushing and 12 touchdowns, I would not be surprised. That's what kind of talent I think Breece Hall has. So I think he's one of those guys. Like, what if the Chiefs decide in the offseason they're okay. They're going to use the draft to stockpile, more defense and maybe some more offensive linemen. They're set at the wide receiver position probably. They might say, you know what, let's go out and get Breece Hall. And he could be now our bell cow for 3 years. And they can make the money work. So, what if he ends up a place like there? Or if he ends up with Washington and Jaden Daniels? There's places where he can go and immediately become a top 6 to 8 overall running back. And we know he's got the skill set to do it. Devonta Smith, I think right now the writing is on the wall. While I think A.J. Brown is still a great player, I think Devonta Smith is starting to eat into that. And I was concerned that Devonta Smith wasn't going to live up to expectations. I know in one league I traded him. Some regret there, but I got back Ladd McConkey. But I think Devonta Smith is a guy who right now is playing his best football of his career. And I do wonder if in the offseason, A.J. Brown, I think Philly's not going to trade A.J. Brown now. But if they don't win the Super Bowl and how much he's been griping, could I see a scenario where they move on from A.J. Brown in the offseason, get another wide receiver in there that's good, maybe not on A.J. Brown level? I think Howie Roseman works trades and knows how to do things and get business done. That scenario ever happens, Devonta Smith steps into the clear wide receiver 1 role as soon as next year and doesn't have to wait out A.J. Brown starting to decline. So I think it's a good opportunity because A.J.'s still there, because there are up and downs, whether that's from Jalen Hurts, whether that's from A.J. Brown or Devonta Smith himself. There's still enough ups and downs that he's probably valued as wide receiver 20 to 24 in dynasty circles, that if you think this ceiling is more like top 16, top 18, I think you could go get him, but still pay a little bit of a cheaper price. So I would say buy now on Devonta Smith. And then the last guy I want to mention is, I mentioned him before with Harold Fannin, is I try to go buy David Njoku right now, this week, before the trade deadline, because I do think he's going to be traded. And that he could step into another team and go right back to being a top 8, top 10 dynasty tight end. That's not happening in Cleveland right now with how good Harold Fannin's looked. But there are teams that could use a big-time pass-catching, playmaking tight end like David Njoku. Right now is probably the lowest his value is going to be, whether he gets traded, whether he hits the open market. Somebody's going to sign him with the expectation that he's their clear pass-catching tight end, and I would say top 3, 4 in terms of pecking order for targets. And I think it's a real scenario where he could end up somewhere, where he's number 3 for targets, maybe even number 2, depending on, what the wide receiver room looks like. But I think right now you can get him for a lot cheaper prior to that trade deadline. Maybe someone doesn't think or follow it enough to be like, yeah, he could be traded this week. I would send offers over the next few days prior to the trade deadline and try to get David Njoku for whether it's a 2nd-round rookie pick or a 3rd-round rookie pick and a player, something. And I would try to get Njoku on my team right now, because I think that could be a sneaky guy who then starts to outperform what you paid for him. So there it is, guys. Fantasy Dynasty Report and NFL Rookie Report for Week 8, talking about the Sunday game. Started the show with the NFL Draft Report for Week 9 of the college football season. If you're enjoying this content, please get over to the website, S2S Football, fastest and easiest way to get there. Check out the Premium Content tab. You can see everything we offer for the Premium Notebooks. It's all for $9.99. You get tons of information. You get the Scouting Notebook. You get the Rankings Notebook, all our different scouting, all our different rankings, all my detailed scouting reports that will be updated throughout this season, and obviously tons of updates in the pre-draft months, more players added, and then you also get the draft projections notebook that comes in April. 400 players, tabs for every position, offense and defense, snapshot of how they win, some developmental areas that they could work on, combine testing number, measurement, put in the order in which I expect them to come off the board from all everything I'm hearing, listening, and reading from the best in the industry. I don't just look at the consensus big board. There's like 8 guys or so that I really trust. And I kind of gather and read everything from them and kind of collaborate it all together and kind of from everything, from all of those really great sources, put it together a list in terms of how I think they're going to come off the board. We've had tremendous success with the Draft Projections Notebook, trying to be a guide to what's going to happen on draft weekend. So on behalf of my sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us. And we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.